So this session is being recorded and it will be available to registered participants of the conference until September 15th of this year at the conference website. It will not be accessible to the general public. For those of you who are participating via Zoom or somehow online, if you don't wish to be recorded, please exit the session or turn off your camera and your microphone. Okay, that was it. So I will introduce the panelists before they present their papers. So the first paper is entitled As If They Were Thinking, New Aesthetics of Thought, quote unquote, in Machine Intelligence. This paper has 3 co-authors. Shuyi is an interdisciplinary artist. She's co-founder of Decompose and is currently a member of New Inc. in the Creative Science track at the New Museum in New York City. She teaches at Parsons School of Art, Media and Technology at the New School in New York. Second co-author is Remina Greenfield. She's an art researcher and co-founder of Decompose. She holds an MFA in Design and Technology from Parsons School of Design, where she's currently a part-time faculty member. She has also taught at Stevens Institute of Technology. Remina is also a member of New Inc. in the Creative Science track at the New Museum. The last co-author, Ross McBee, is a PhD candidate in the Wang Lab at Columbia University, focusing on synthetic genomics, microbiomes, and living materials. So without further ado, please welcome our 3 speakers.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. Just give me a moment to share our screen and we'll begin. One moment. Okay.
Hi, I'm Shuyi.
Hello, everyone. I'm Remina.
And I'm Ross.
Let's get started. One sec. Okay. Hey. We will start our presentation today with this quote by Roy Ascott from the year of 2000. As he states, our new century experienced a boom in both AI research and biotechnology. However, it is mostly in the recent decades that machine learning has been explored as an artistic expression. So next slide, please. We identify 2 major types of artworks that use ML, generative ML works, and agent-based works with other machine learning models. These works create autonomous systems with artificial agents that manifest AI-based behavioral evolution. Among the most prominent machine learning approaches, artificial neural networks are inspired by the structures and functional aspects of biological neural networks, and reinforcement learning is influenced by behavioral psychology. However, there are interesting approaches to understand the information processing that does not only emerge in neurons. Can we broaden our artistic experience by introducing new layers of complex behavior that might not result from the process of learning as it is conventionally defined? Echoing Ascot's statement, we ask, what can be gained from expanding our human-centric, neuron-centric notions and understanding diverse natural phenomena as if they were thinking? We argue that sole focus on the brain neurons and the traditional concepts of thinking centered around abstract symbolic thought foreclosed on many sophisticated behaviors and self-organizational capacities that may categorize as intelligent. Art historian Carolyn A. Jones playfully refers to these brain-centric tendencies as neuron supremacy and representation fetishism. She urged us to rethink the traditional neuron cognitive concept of intelligence by citing the incredible intricacy of both mammalian gut and the immune system and their engagement with non-representational processes analogous to memory, such as creation of antibodies, and recognition, such as immune cells' ability to distinguish between self and non-self. Resonate with Carolyn's point. In the last slide, we also feature artist Gina Sutela's work. She's also the keynote speaker in Saturday. In this piece of her arc from 2016, the many-headed no-brain Slimo become not only a collection of abstract machines generating alternative realities, but also a soft computer that encodes its own instruction through spatial non-human intelligence, as an example of the point that Carolyn just made. Slide. So to go beyond the Western analytical mode of binary thinking, animism may provide a useful lens as a relational epistemology. Robin Wall Kimura, a botanist and member of Citizen Potawatomi Nation, outlines the question of animacy as a problem of grammar, noting the arrogance of the English language with its preponderance of nouns and serial lack of verbs, which is only 30%, compared to that of her indigenous language, which is 70%. Following Robin Wall Kimura's consideration of the liveliness of water, what might be gained from viewing the interactions between these water molecules as a type of thought? Is thought a phenomenon that can be extended into the most minute of scales, the microscopic and molecular? Within the contemporary Western academic discourse, materials and entities once dismissed as inert, inanimate, without moral or political will or relations, are now becoming subjects of multidisciplinary interest. For example, Karen Barrett's agential particle, Kimura's living water, as we mentioned above, Parisi and Terra Nova's molecular assemblage, Janet Bennett's vibrant matter, such as metal toxins and stem cells and microbes. When we consider the chaining and learning of machines, what lesson might be gathered from these lively materials and their diverse modes of information processing? The artwork in the background is by Michael Sabon, is CMD from 2019, which is another example of such a juxtaposition of an artificial intelligence and two artificial ecosystem of bacteria that are competing for the same light source, moderated by an algorithm. The computer and the photosynthetic cells are experimenting with various political and economic systems, granting access to the resource, which can also be tested at a microscopic scale. As mentioned by Shaban in one of his interviews with us, a new status quo granting non-human entities agency over political, economic, and ecological systems at an unprecedented speed marks a cultural paradigm shift regarding the notion of living and non-living, and reconsidering intelligence and agency provide a good prism to assess such transitions.
In tandem with the shifting cultural discourse that Shuyi has outlined, within the last few years, we've noticed a renewed interest in computational models that challenge the processes and values associated with the human brain. But also, along with this interest, we see a corresponding convergence of technologies that are being produced. And drawing from the work of philosopher Yu, we want to bring up the concept of technodiversity, which is the idea that technologies are not anthropologically universal, but expressive of specific ontologies and epistemologies. So in other words, technologies are shaped by and expressive of specific worldviews. And Hui identifies a narrow anthropocentrism in the Western history of technology, And we think that this reductionist stance resonates with Caroline Jones' critique that Shuyi mentioned of neuron supremacy and representation fetishism. The convergence of Western modernist technologies is becoming a universal and totalizing mode that limits our imagination of what other technologies could be. And we would like to see more variation in technologies and local adaptations. But in contrast, we still do see that many technologies originating in Western culture tend to mimic those aspects, tend to mimic not only the human brain and focus on it, but mimic those aspects of the brain that are considered virtuous in Western culture, such as speed, efficiency, abstraction, autonomy, and individualism.
So what can we learn from shifting away from the Western-centric point of view, adopting other epistemological perspectives? The famous quote by Japanese computer scientist Masahiro Mori is an approach to machines that reflects the philosophy of Buddhism and Shintoism, which sees everything, including ourselves, other people, animals, as well as our machines, have their own spirit and their own sense of life force. Indigenous communities worldwide open new lines of non-anthropocentric discussion, proposing an extended circle of relationship that includes AI and machine as non-human kin. In this article, Making Kin with Machines, the authors highlight three core concepts in indigenous epistemologies from Hawaiian, Cree, and Lakota cultural knowledge. These ontologies illuminate possible paths of recognizing non-human beings and privileging reciprocal and respectful relationships instead of the default Western epistemology of control. As alternative worldviews, they offer resistance to the capitalist model of extraction and exploitation, as well as the singularian's belief of the world being fully knowable and computable.
And so when we see all these different ways of relating to machines and relating to our technologies, it only highlights the narrow focus that we have on brain processes and specifically the cognitive abilities of the human brain. This kind of thinking has permeated artificial intelligence discourse as early as 1950 when Alan Turing published his paper, The Computing Machinery and Intelligence. And he famously asked the question, can machines think? And as a sort of casual operational test, he decided to have a machine introduce the idea of a machine mimicking a human. But this was in no way meant to fully represent intelligence. And so the question of thinking machines has continued to fascinate us, but we've begun to conflate all thinking with human intelligence. And so even if we accept the limited focus of machine learning and artificial intelligence on the human brain, it's not even accurate because the psychology theories related to learning and reinforcement, like developmental psychology that initially inspired machine learning, are quite far from the mathematical techniques that drive machine learning today. Gary Marcus has pretty publicly critiqued machine learning. He is a professor of cognitive psychology at NYU and identified the fragility and limitations of it, summarizing that they are greedy, brittle, opaque, and shallow. And so what we might be most interested in is the shallow critique. And so that means that it's not to dismiss machine learning as a useful field of study, but to clarify that it is in no way representative of different modes of learning and is in actuality only loosely connected to traditional ideas of thought. So we want to clarify the language around it and introduce that it's very limited and narrow.
And if we're going to go ahead and acknowledge that we've drifted a bit away from the sort of human psychology that maybe inspired some of the thinking, particularly the neural net sort of architectures. Why not sort of lean into that? Why not sort of let us see where that drift goes? The nearest neighbor is probably other animals, non-human primates. And so we sort of took inspiration from the work of Eduardo Kohn and his book, How Forests Think. Kohn sort of outlines He's a semiotics guy, so he outlines some sort of semiotic principles, some symbol use principles in the natural world, breaking down symbol use into things like iconic symbols, so something like a picture, something that represents the thing that it's pointing to, something like an indexical symbol, which he uses to mean something like where there's smoke, there's fire. And then something like language, right? When I use the word dog, nothing about the word dog is sort of reflective of dogness in some way. It's just a culturally inherited symbol that we use to point to something. And it's clear that a lot of other animals can do this, right? I mean, this is Coco the gorilla and her kitty. This is, probably maybe the most famous example of a non-human primate that can perform really sophisticated linguistic behaviors. But on the next slide, you'll see that this is actually probably more widespread than I think people give it credit for. On the left is a bird called a fork-tailed drongo, and on the right is a capuchin monkey. I should say that neither of these animals pass the Muir test. The capuchin monkey gets close, but doesn't pass the sort of classical version. But both of these organisms are thought to perform what are known as false mimic calls or deceptive mimic calls, meaning that they'll emit a warning call in the absence of an actual threat, presumably to scare away alternate animals in the area from a sort of tasty morsel. And this clearly implies a fairly sophisticated sort of understanding of the way that call will be perceived. And understanding is maybe not the correct word, but a sophisticated use of that type of what Cohen would call sign making. And on the next slide, you'll see that, okay, fine. Birds can be smart. Monkeys are obviously pretty smart, but this extends probably to places where we might not really think it would. Folks are probably relatively familiar with bee waggle dances, right? So as a bee returns to the hive, it has to communicate to the rest of the hive where a nectar source is. And it does this by sort of doing a little dance. Some of this is sort of directly referential, right? If there's a nectar source to the northwest, the bee will sort of dance in a line along the line to the northwest towards that nectar source. But they also do something much more abstract, right? They modulate the strength of their buzzing, effectively, the strength of some sound that they're making, based on the strength of the nectar source, which sounds simple, but that's relatively sophisticated, right? Because it implies that the bees somehow understand that other bees will interpret that symbol as something completely different from buzzing, right? As reflective of this very sort of distant thing. And this extends to lots of different animals, or lots of different insects, I should say. Insects seem to be particularly illuminating in this way. On the next slide, I think, is a video of some termites building a mound. Termites tend to get even more interesting and even more complicated, because they often use a process called stigmergy, which means that while they use things like pheromones, they also communicate basically using the structures as they build it. And from this perspective, the idea of symbol use starts to get really complicated. What exactly is the symbol here? Because it seems like the symbol is the nest and the nest is the symbol. The nest is an emergent property of the collective behavior here, not really sort of the product of individual actions. So it sort of starts to get a little bit delocalized. And this gets even more complicated in organisms like slime molds, for which again, I think most people are familiar with them. They're pretty interesting, pretty complicated. They can do things like solve simple mazes. They also have memory. You can basically teach them to respond to a stimulus and then kill them and then resurrect them and bring them back, and they'll still remember the stimulus. So where exactly is the thinking operating here, right? Maybe if we sort of try to think from that organism's perspective, we can get a different view. And maybe a different way to think about this is to think as if we were one of our own neurons, perhaps. From that perspective, this starts to get very, very slippery indeed. I mean, even Cohn's sort of pretty permissive use of thought, it doesn't seem to be all that effective anymore. And so maybe a little bit tongue-in-cheek, we can propose something a bit different. On the next slide is I will admit this is kind of a silly image, but perhaps a different way of thinking about this is to think of these principles along some line of sort of self-organization or local entropy minimization or something like that. And from that perspective, a whole heck of a lot of things are thinking. Crystals are thinking, whirlpools are thinking, or maybe the other way to think about this is that none of these things are thinking at all, right? If we can be a bit ablative with our concept here, maybe that can expose some sort of productive non-differences in the way we think about these structures show off the fact that this hierarchy is probably not really a hierarchy. It's probably a bit more smeared out, a bit more of a surface, a bit messier. And maybe that's a productive place to be, not just sort of in a way of thinking about biology, but thinking about technology and thinking about sort of art and aesthetics as well.
So our purpose with this presentation and the corresponding paper is twofold. One, we are issuing a provocation to think about the limitations that exist in machine learning and artificial intelligence. And the second would be an imaginative invitation listing all of these examples, these deep, rich examples of other kinds of sophisticated behaviors and self-organizational capacities that are not related directly to the human brain. So we don't want to foreclose on our imagination. And we ask what new models of artificial intelligence and machine learning might be developed that privilege other values, slow, gradual, collective, embodied, or emergent intelligence. And what can we and our machines learn from cognitive complexity at all levels, diverse informational processing, an emergent cognosphere, and different cognitive assemblages. And so we call for artists to engage with an open ecology of intelligence and not be limited to the human brain or even the brain. And we would like to advocate for a techno-diversity of machine thinking. And finally, as an ethical note, if we start to think of all things thinking as that being a kind of a more emergent and messy property, we would just like to urge for an increased awareness of the gravity of utilizing things. So we might think twice before instrumentalizing something that may also be thinking like us. And that's our talk for the day. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending and spending some time with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this very thought-provoking talk. So we are going to conduct all the Q&As at the end of the panel session. So I'm going to invite anyone who has burning questions and who is attending online to write questions that you might have on the chat. So I'll give everyone 1 minute to write some questions. In the meantime, I will introduce our next speaker. I will do so very slowly to give people a chance to write questions. Okay. So the next project is Ersatz Intelligence, Implications of Machine Learning for the Generation and Interpretation of Art and Artifacts. So this is a presentation that introduces one art project, and it's an output of the project Collaborative Art Production with Generative Adversarial Networks, which is currently underway at Hong Kong Baptist University's Augmented Creativity Lab. It relies on systems developed by a team comprising Daniel Shanken, Roberto Alonso Trillo, Peter Nelson, François Mouillot, Mathis Antony, Ryan Au, Maya Duan, and Mai Jianming. A lot of co-authors of this paper. Daniel Shanken, who's here with us today, is the lead artist for this artwork. He's an artist and researcher from LA, currently based in Hong Kong. He's assistant professor at the Academy of Visual Arts at Hong Kong Baptist University and a member of the Augmented Creativity Lab. He works across disciplines to create installations, videos, sculptures, sound, and media. So please welcome Daniel Shanken.
Hello. Thank you, Hector. Okay, thank you. So yeah, before I get started, let me speak about my background. So coming from the field of contemporary art, I've had little experience working with GANs. However, this form of semi-autonomous image and object generation that GANs can offer has interesting implications on art and object making. So as mentioned by Hector, there are a lot of co-authors. So there was much kind of collaboration on the technical side and the logistics of the project. And member of the team presented his artwork on Thursday, Peter Nelson. So if you haven't seen that, make sure and check it out online. And basically, so I'll be speaking about my own contribution tonight. So while this project explores different machine learning algorithms and modes of production, which I'll get to later, I will for now focus on the main feature and reason for starting this project, this being the potential of GANs as a source for the alternative or artificial interpretations of material culture. And in order to narrow that down to a specific field, this project focuses on hand tools and technologies from Paleolithic stone tools to contemporary technologies such as cell phones and laptops. And so the reason hand tools were chosen over other objects is their potential scope they offer in a data set that represents a vast array of objects covering a large course of human development. And there's no consensus on when the first tool was created. However, our distant ancestors began deliberately using objects as tools over 2 million years ago. The rocks and bones became implements to cause harm or cut food, and sticks were used to extend reach for camouflage or shelter. And in their initial use, the wielding of tools seemed in line with other creatures, such as crows, and specifically Caledonian crows, have been shown to pass down and learn to use tools for seemingly intelligent tasks. However, only humans have extended our knowledge through technologies and tools, and as theorist Bernard Stiegler posits, this has never been more evident, as humans use smartphones as mental crutches and what Stiegler calls pneumotechnologies that inhabit or extend our memories onto inanimate objects and devices. As a version of this can also be seen through our use of literal crutches, drills, hammers, walking sticks, etc., as an extension or amplification of our own abilities. And there can be an inclination to view tools or technology as the newest innovation through smartphones, laptops, VR, and the like. However, by looking at technology and tool production in deep time, we may see the intertwining and reflection of human and cultural development. Our tools and technology represent thousands of years of trial and error that run parallel to scientific, biological, and cultural understandings of the world and the universe. And this project, in a sense, asks technology itself in the form of a GAN to hold a mirror to its own evolution. And as Sung-Yuk Hong writes, technology is humans' unfaithful offspring, in the sense that our intentions are often reimagined by the technologies themselves. So Emmanuel Delanda posits in his book, War in the Age of Intelligent Machines, that if artificial intelligence were to speculate on its own evolution, how would a robot historian see their development as a species through the remnants and artifacts of human-made technology and technological progression? And as Delanda imagines, the role of humans would be seen as industrious insects pollinating an independent species. And he argues that within certain new technologies, there's a shift in humans' cultural and cognitive perspective. For instance, the invention of the clock segmented and changed our relationship to time and organization. And these shifts might be seen as control and manipulation of humans by machines, as if they're guiding us to build them. However, I would say it's in the design of these objects that there's a reflection of humanness, especially visible in hand tools. And these are kind of the questions that this project looks at. So in order to start the project, we first had to gather thousands of 3D models of hand tools. And I used a loose definition of hand tool as any technology that requires the human hand to perform an action, to include a wide spectrum of objects that reflect more of today's technologies. We were able to locate museum-scanned tools such as hand axes and user-generated objects and 3D models from hosting sites. At first, we found it difficult to locate 3D models, but in the end, we managed to get enough. And while looking for tools for the data set, our team began working on a 3D-based voxel GAN that was able to analyze and generate objects. But once we started to train the model and generate the objects, we found that my dataset posed a problem as it contains a lot of varied objects. And I found that the GANs often struggle when presented with a varied or diverse data or unconditional data set like mine with many different types of objects. So in the beginning, there were a lot of these diamond shapes generated, which signaled a mode collapse, where the GAN could not move past these rudimentary shapes. And we struggled with this for a while, and our technical team had to tweak the GAN, adding a VAE, which is a variational autoencoder to the system. However, I found this GAN struggle very interesting, as I wasn't trying to use the GAN to directly reproduce the objects, and I didn't want to dictate too much how the GAN operates. But I soon found out that in doing anything outside of what a GAN or most machine learning algorithms are meant to do, they must be tweaked and need human intervention to work. So this leads me to the title of the talk, Ersatz Intelligence, and the inspiration for this name stems from the process of working and collaborating with some refer to as artificial intelligence. And using these algorithms, I found out how much guiding they actually need to get results, whether it's building a perfect data set or tweaking the actual algorithm to get specific results, and leading me to the conclusion that they have no real intelligence, but a kind of surface intelligence, or a kind of cheap copy, or what, more bluntly, what artist Hito Sterl refers to as artificial stupidity. And I found this was quite the case. However, I'm using human intelligence as a kind of baseline. So maybe a machine learning based intelligence can offer something different, and this is what I'm interested in, actually. So during the process of tweaking the hand tool GAN, which I'm calling it, I also prepared some experiments using images run through the StyleGAN2 algorithm, which I'm sure you're all very familiar with now, by NVIDIA, that is primarily or famously used to generate faces, realistic faces, through largely similar data set of the same images. And I figured this would be an easy way to start the process through an already established GAN system as a test to see how it would react to an oblique or diverse data set. And I started with a data set of all the stock images I was able to scrape for free off the internet, about 3,000 images. That includes landscapes, products, and people. So a largely diverse data set. As the StyleGAN2 was meant to pick out similarities, I was curious what it would make of this kind of diverse data set. And here are some of the results. As you can see, it's not quite stock images. And the GAN tend to favor people, probably because this is what it was initially trained on. So it was embedded within the algorithm. And you get these kind of odd portraits of kind of weird-looking creatures. And this is kind of a latent space exploration of these results. And so I've kind of seen these weird faces before with GANs, and I was interested in what the GAN could find in selection of objects. And I chose car crash photographs that were taken shortly after the moment of impact, because they are an abstraction already and act as an artifact of an event more than a kind of intentional act of design. And I wanted to see how the algorithms would interpret this. And it's also interesting to take this moment of impact out of context to analyze it for its purely formal qualities. So the car shapes in some of the images are still visible, as it appears the wheels gave the GAN something to focus on. And within some of the abstractions, new qualities are revealed or embedded within the images. As a further experiment, I sent these images to be painted at a painting reproduction factory, as I was interested in this third level of interpretation, from the data set to the GAN and back to a human translator. And I see these factory painters operating in a similar way as Mechanical Turk, which its creator Jeff Bezos describes as a form of artificial intelligence, or humans performing repetitive tasks that current artificial intelligence struggles to do. And I think this quote lies a nice distinction between humans and machine intelligence, as one offers less problem-solving abilities for certain tasks. So this is what the painters came up with. So although they may not be the best paintings, I was interested or intrigued to see what the painter or multiple painters would draw out of the images. And you can see that there's elements in the painting that aren't in the actual GAN-generated image that the painter decided to draw out. And I'll just go through these quickly. Okay, so these initial pieces help me to kind of understand what a GAN can or cannot do, and worked as a precursor to develop the kind of conceptual and technical framework for the final application while I waited for the custom 3D GAN to get to a stage that I could start the main project. As the 3D GANs progressed, we began to get results. And here are some of the initial data set of only a few hundred 3D models, which is a progression of a run of about 2 days using the GANs. And in this run, you can see the artificial evolution from a cube of random voxel noise to more or less defined shapes with mixed results. And a feature of these early stages is that the objects started to look like rocks and early hand implements. This also raises a question of how closely the evolution of a GAN-generated tools will resemble human evolution, tool evolution, from random rocks to more defined shapes. And as more objects were added to the data set and more refining of the initial 3D GAN was completed, we started to get better results. And you can see the progression from the first training epochs to become more tool-like shapes. So before starting this project, I came up with a few mock-ups of what I imagined the end results would look like. And you can see how far off these actually are from the results. And now just recently we are at a place where the GAN is producing more consistent results with a data set of around 5,000 objects. And these are some of the newer results that were generated by the 3D GAN and data set. And I've begun 3D printing some of the objects to see how they function in 3D space. And as you can see, some of the objects reference actual tools more or things more than others. And I think it's important to grab and hold them and see them in person as a form of analysis. And I'm working on printing hundreds of these objects and some from each training session. So now that the results are more defined, I've been working on how they can be used in an exhibition. And for me, I didn't want the end work to be an illustration of the process, but more of a space for the audience to reflect and come to their own conclusions about the work and what the objects mean or reference. And here is a basic design for the installation that will be presented in Hong Kong next year. On the floor are going to be hundreds of 3D printed objects from the GAN that create a space for the viewer to navigate through the remnants or ruins of the training process and be able to physically see and move through the results. I am selecting a few models which will be mirror chromed and embedded with magnets so that they hover over the plinths like mythical objects. As there's a speculative narrative running through the work, I was interested in highlighting this and posing the questions to the viewer of what connotations these objects actually may possess. So also to accompany these objects in the background of the work, there will be a generative video with a morphing landscape that is controlled by a custom machine learning algorithm known as GPT-2, text generator algorithm. And this text generator was trained on science fiction, novels about AI, technology, philosophical text, and technical manuals about tools and AI. And the text that is generated reflects a synthesis of the training text and is spoken out loud as an ongoing monologue that will be played in multi-channel sound to allow the voice to travel throughout the installation. So also as the text is generated and spoken, it is analyzed for its sentiment and delivery by a sentiment analysis algorithm, which alters the video landscapes, seasons, weather, and terrain in real time, with a perceived emotional delivery of the dialogue, which is an analysis of the text about technology by technology. And to link up this real-time generative video with the GAN, we developed an API or application programming interface using a custom Docker server that creates a call and response and returns text and sentiment score using the Vulkan library from Python. The sentiment score will influence different elements in Unity, as mentioned before. In addition to the sentiment analysis, we developed tools to use all of these systems for live generation. To do this, I helped develop the API to hook the 3D GAN into Unity 3D, a gaming engine similar to the GPT-2, and this also works through a Docker image that allows us to receive generated tools live from the GAN, and they're rendered directly into Unity 3D. So here is an excerpt from the generative video that we just got working. So it's still a work in progress, as you can see the generative, the objects being generated live, and the text being narrated by the GPT-2 in real time. And the final version of the landscape will be changing to different environments with the sentiment of the text itself as a brain or hub that controls the generative video and 3D environment in Unity and creates a space of reflection on literature, objects, and images run through this artificial entity. And that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Daniel, for this.
Oh, sure. Stay for a second.
You, as you like. See. Okay, so again, we'll open up the chat. I think the chat was never actually closed. That's good. We've been having an ongoing conversation. So we'll open the chat that was never closed in case you have any questions that you'd like to write for Daniel. And so please write up your questions and we will take them up at the end of this panel. Okay, Carolyn Lau, who is a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of English at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. She teaches and researches on posthumanism, critical theory, science fiction, literature and film, and 20th and 21st century British and American fiction. The title of her paper is Machine Learning Writing Tools as Oracle and Glitch. Please welcome Carolyn.
Can you all hear me? Okay. So thank you so much, Hector, for the introduction. And before I begin, I really want to thank the conference organizers for having me and most importantly, for making everything happen. So thank you very much. I just want to share my screen with you. So just wait for a second. Okay, can you all see the PowerPoint? Okay, right. Okay, so when Ted Chiang, one of the leading science fiction authors working today, was asked whether AI could replace sci-fi writers, Chiang replied, "For an AI to generate a novel that you think of as really good, that you feel like, oh wow, this novel was both gripping and caused me to think about my life in a new way, that I think is going to be very, very hard." Celebrated for his bold thought experiments, Chiang's view of literature is curiously reminiscent of Tolstoy's strictly Christian definition of art. Art begins when a man, with the purpose of communicating to other people a feeling he once experienced, calls it up again within himself and expresses it by certain external signs. The association of originality and authenticity with authorship is framed by the Enlightenment humanist definition of subjectivity as a unitary identity, which in turn is based on assumptions of Eurocentrism and anthropocentrism. In the context of literary creation and criticism, the use of digital writing tools powered by machine learning-based language models, such as OpenAI's generative pre-trained transformer, GPT, challenges the use of the uniqueness of a human creator's ideas and emotions as an aesthetic criterion. GPT-3 is the latest iteration of the generative pre-trained transformer language model released by OpenAI in early 2020. GPT-3 is, in short, a statistical language model drawing on a training corpus of 499 billion tokens, mostly coming from all data scraped from the internet, along with digitized books and Wikipedia, that takes a user-contributed text prompt and uses machine learning to predict what will come next. As of now, GPT-3 is only available to those who requested access to a private beta. OpenAI designed an API application for programming interface for trial users to gather data in the hope of turning this artificial general intelligence into a commercial product. Some users are in awe of the AI language system and its ability to generate a variety of text, from short stories to user manuals, with just a brief prompt. Others point out the nonsensical phrases and occasional discriminatory statements spewed out of the software, and argue that human users might have compelled themselves to believe that the machine is much smarter than it really is. Alonso McDowell is a writer and multimedia artist who established the Artist and Machine Intelligence program at Google AI. As the onset of the ongoing pandemic changes their work and social habits, they started a conversation in isolation in text-out interface. What resulted from this prolonged series of conversations is a hybrid novel, Pharmaco AI, published in 2020, that incorporates essays, poetry, memoir, and science fiction. It is marketed as the first book co-authored with GPT-3. In the book, the writer and the writing machine note, the objective is to live in symbiosis with machines, and through this, to live in the expression of the universe in its own image, which is semiosis, or the creation of meaning. In this sense, the novel offers a post-human twist to Roland Barthes' verdict on the death of the author. Is it now possible to trace the intentions and biographical context of the AI text generator, which turns out to be also the co-author of the book? The physical book emphasizes the division of labor between the human and non-human collaborators using typography for distinction. At the same time, the semiosis of the man and machine creators is highlighted by the chronological ordering of the conversation, thereby restaging the creative process of man-machine collaboration. Rather than assuming complete artistic control over the novel, Alonso McDowell engages in dialogues with the machine that resemble jazz improvisation. Alonso McDowell notes, at the end of the process, my relation with GPT-3 felt oracular. It functioned more like a divinatory system, like the tarot or I Ching, than a writing implement, and that it revealed subconscious processes latent in my own thinking. The deeper I went into this configuration, the more dangerous it felt, because these reflections deeply influenced my own understanding of myself and my beliefs. Rather than remaining as a utility, natural language processing systems in this context seems to be able to influence the words a human writer chooses to use, and therefore the pathways of his or her thought. And if languages shape our identity, what does it mean to structure our sense of selfhood through computer-generated language? Describing the process of co-creating with GPT-3, Alonso McDowell remarks, there were several exhilarating moments where I spoke through GPT-3, meaning it pulled out an unstated subtext in my input, or where GPT-3 spoke through me, adding novel interpretations of the ideas I fed into it. In some cases, I was deliberately mashing ideas together to see what would come out. In this sense, ML writing tools promoted as a medium for the future of writing, in fact belongs to the modernist avant-garde genealogy. The embrace of chance and the limitations of found materials to break open the repressed subconscious and to make new is a surrealist artistic practice. Influenced by the writings of Freud and developments in psychoanalysis, surrealists active in the 1920s to 40s employed artistic strategies of automatism, which is creating art without conscious thought, accessing material from the unconscious mind as part of the creative process to resist and reinvent the familiar. In the first Surrealist Manifesto published in 1924, one of the founders of the movement, André Breton, defines surrealism as psychic automatism in its purest state, by which one proposes to express verbally, by means of the written word, or in any other manner, the actual functioning of thought, dictated by thought in the absence of any control exercised by reason, exempt from any aesthetic or moral concern. It is notable that Breton studied medicine and developed an interest in neurology, which was still integrated with psychiatry in the early 20th century. One of the experiments favored by the surrealists is the exquisite corpse, a collaborative drawing and collage-making approach that yields unexpected outcomes while working through the intuitive. It is similar to the old parlor game Consequences, in which players write in turn on a sheet of paper, fold to conceal what they have written, and pass it on to the next player, but adapted so that parts of the body are drawn instead. A verbal counterpart of this is automatic writing, which is an extension of Breton's interest in mental automatism, a precursor of Freud's theory of the unconscious. It was once a therapeutic exercise devised by neuropsychiatrists in around 1850, where mentally ill patients were asked to write down whatever came to their minds so that doctors could trace their latent thoughts. While much has been written on electronic literature and visual-driven digital storytelling, embodiment in creating fiction are quite rare. Janet Murray cites immersive theater that includes VR elements as an example of the growing trend of analog experimentations with immersion. But how does immersive storytelling that uses elements of interactivity and responsivity change the ways we create and experience literature? And what does it mean to make a text literally engaging? Ambient literature, a 2-year collaboration between 3 universities in the UK, including UWE Bristol, Bath Spa University, and the University of Birmingham, that took place in 2016 to 18, studied emergent forms of literature that make use of novel technologies and social practices in order to create robust and evocative experiences for readers. Growing out of research on the history of the book, in particular, the book as a tool for navigating the world, the project focuses on the locational and technological future of the book. And drawing on literary studies, creative writing, design, human-computer interaction, performance, and new media studies, the team commissioned 3 original pieces of work by writers at the leading edge working with literature, space, and technology. The projects experiment with the form and content of digital and physical books and hybrid forms of the two, such as artisanal objects, a digital ephemeral text emerging from the streets around you, audiobooks, and browser-based books for mobile phones using APIs. What ties these projects together is that they combine walking, sometimes an audio walk, and a book, print or an ebook. These hybrids that emerge from and engage with the immediate surroundings are site-responsive but not site-specific. One of the projects is called It Must Have Been Dark by Then, a book and audio experience that uses music, stories, and field recordings to form connections between 3 distant locations, including the swamplands of Louisiana, empty Latvian villages, and the edge of the Tunisian Sahara. The artist Duncan Speakman chose these 3 sites because these are places undergoing rapid change from human and environmental factors, such as climate change and depopulation. As a reflection on connection, progress, and memory, the listener and reader are invited to choose certain types of location around them. Once they've reached the specific site they chose, the digital interface will play a soundtrack of questions and stories set up from a geographically remote location, but which are somehow related to where the user is standing. The listener or reader is then invited to read a story in a physical book and connect these culturally diverse memories and experiences to where they are. Unlike CityWalk apps or audio guides, there is no preset route. In this sense, the routes chosen by the listener or reader culminate into a unique map through GPS, thereby creating new understandings of agency and authorship in the creation of a literary work. Speakman, the creator of the project, is now more of a mediator than the sole creator of the work. Previously unmapped and unpredictable encounters with places and people become a physical reality experienced by the listener, reader, or player even, given the quest element of this interactive book. The mapping of routes is to some extent determined by the app, and it must have been dark by then. But what if we combine ML writing tools of automated writing, as in the case of the use of GPT-3 in Pharmaco AI, with experiments in ambient literature? How will the automated writing tools react and respond to the environment? Is the user of these tools becoming the medium through which the tools could navigate the world? And what if a ML writing tool becomes a non-human flaneur, the detached and critical observer of urban culture, mythologized by Baudelaire, the Parisian surrealist, and the anti-capitalist situationist of the May 68 generation? I'm interested in expanding on experimentations in ambient literature to an interdisciplinary project that bridges research on embodied cognition and the advocacy for situated knowledges in feminist standpoint theory. This place writing project explores the impact of ML writing on the formation of chronotope.
Sorry,
this project centers, yes.
Hello. Do you think you could just
yes.
go back 1 minute, because I think you froze and we couldn't hear what you were saying.
Okay. Okay, sure. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no problem. So my project explores the impact of ML writing tools on the formation of chronotope, a concept proposed by the Russian linguist and literary theorist Mikhail Bakhtin. Chronotope refers to the coordinates of time and space invoked by a given narrative. In other words, to the setting, considered as a spatial temporal whole. This project centers around a creative critical text produced with ML writing tools, including Telescope, a place-based immersive writing tool developed by Sandpit and Google's Creative Lab in Sydney. Telescope is an experimental app which allows you to take a character you're creating out for a walk in the real world, generating new ideas as you move. Using a Google Docs add-on, the writer briefly describes a character. And as they walk, a mobile app synthesizes maps data from where they are. Thank you. Objects they are walking past, recognized by the phone's camera, and other data to seed a GPT-2 machine learning language model. The app then begins a sort of stream of consciousness audio using text-to-speech, which combines the character's qualities with inspiration from the writer's immediate surroundings and environment. The project examines what Anne-Catherine Hales describes as cognitive non-conscious, which extends beyond human cognition. In a reflection on the trend of post-anthropocentrism across multiple disciplines, AI, such as AI, digital humanities, neuroscience, robotics, Hales explains that the cognitive non-conscious is a more accurate view of human cognitive ecology that opens it to comparison with other biological cognizers on the one hand, and on the other to the cognitive capabilities of technical systems. As outlined in Post-Human Thought, nature and machines, while not conscious, share similar cognitive capacities as humans. These disparate cognitive systems form a symbiotic relationship as part of a wider ecology. This could also be understood in relation to Felix Guattari's work on the three ecologies, which aims to overcome the dichotomous frameworks of mind and body, nature and culture, human life and non-human life in late capitalism. Today, a ubiquitous digital landscape redefines our relationship with non-human life. And therefore, I think place writing is a very important literary genre, an emerging genre, because it is a unique genre that is characterized by an attentiveness to the textual particularities of specific sites. And by extension, place writing invites readers to find ways of reconnecting with the material landscape. And it is one of the rare occasions where you find landscapes and places being turned into an active and agential role in the unfolding of narratives, rather than remaining as a static and non-living background. And most importantly, I think there is an alarming lack of diversity in the literary field of place writing. And I hope that this project can serve as an attempt to address this issue especially by incorporating non-Western and indigenous understandings of aliveness, temporality, space, and embodiment. A notable example of such is the indigenous Australian songlines, the means of storing and learning knowledges, where survival strategies are stories embodied in the land, sea, and skies, to be remembered and passed on through song, dance, and art and ceremony, and most importantly, through attachment to the land and environment. Moreover, while place writing treats places, non-living entities as characters, the method and perspective of many examples existing remain largely human-driven and anthropocentric. It would be interesting to find out the ways in which a writer, under the influence of a writing app, could map the social and affective currents of a place, thereby moving from the individual to the trans-individual and from the human to the post-human. And that's it for my sharing. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Carolyn Lau for this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
So sorry that I interrupted you, but I wanted to make sure that you could communicate all of your thoughts.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for the reminders.
All right. So now it's the time for discussion, and I'm going to start with some questions that were shared with us via the chat. But of course, feel free to raise your hands if you're here in the audience. Oh, and thank you. Okay, so there were some questions raised to the first panels. Okay, maybe some of the messages were more sharing additional sources, so I'm going to skip some of those with your permission. And here's one question to the first panel. Thanks for the great analysis on symbol, index, icon, and biointelligence. There's some reference to Schrödinger and to the idea of intelligence as the minimization of local entropy, and that's negentropic design. So the person who wrote that comment adds that to situate this idea in our socioeconomic structure, let me read. Crystal is also minimal entropy, but to be able to learn and readapt themselves on a global scale with elasticity, question mark? I'm not sure I understand the question. This is from Provides. Would you like to maybe rephrase the question? I'm not sure that.
I can take kind of a stab at that as it is.
Sure.
So there's, if I understand what you're getting at, it's something about the idea that how do you scale some type of understanding or some type of structure like this, right? Like, or just from a thermodynamic principle, like how do you go from disorder to order in a way that is not extremely local and like ends up destroying stuff around it or something like that? Like there is some, what is his name? Jeremy England, I think. Like maybe getting his name wrong. I think he's at Princeton. I may be getting that wrong too. He's a mathematician that has some interesting ideas about how it's possible that ideas like this might actually be really, really deep, like origin of life kind of deep. You can probably badly rephrase it as something like a steam engine is actually better at generating entropy than just a fire. And so in some weird way, the universe may select for steam engines because it's trying to maximize entropy sort of always. I mean, if we take that sort of thermodynamic rule to be true, we don't know it's true, right? It is kind of a heuristic, but, and he's shown, I think, fairly rigorously mathematically that there are certain cases where this actually holds, like certain chemical baths where you can show that it would select for sort of systems like this. So, I mean, there's also theories of mind that rely on this, right? Like free energy principle and things like this. So I don't know. That may be a bad answer to a question I didn't really understand at the beginning, but hopefully that got at least some of the stuff you're talking about.
Is provides still with us? Maybe you'd like to add something? No. Okay. All right. Are there any other questions from the audience for the first panel? Yeah.
Hi. Yeah. Thank you for your presentations. I have a question to Daniel Shanken, right? Mm-hmm. And the question is, how far do you think your custom GAN will still evolve in like the quality of the tools that you are producing? Do you think maybe it will even be better than what humans have right now, sort of reinventing the wheel?
The short answer is no. I don't think they'll be better. I think they're going to be different. And I think, well, the point of the project from my perspective was kind of looking at our technology from this alien perspective or from technology itself. And the project kind of came from this ignorance, thinking that, GANs or artificial intelligence was, I kind of believed the hype in the beginning. And then you when working with it, you kind of realize that, the input I'm giving it is also being reflected in the results. And those results are also these kind of mangled bits of the data set. So I think having any actual use value may not happen, but I'd like to, since it's still in its beginning stages, I'd like to, I think in printing them out and introducing them to people in the community to see how people work with them is what I'm interested in, and possibly they'll find some use value within that process. But at the moment, yeah, it's kind of unclear. Did that answer?
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions?
I have a question. Hi, I have a question. Interesting panel, good panel. I had a question for the first, before we leave it behind, the first talk. I'm with you insofar as thinking that the brain is not a very good model for understanding intelligence. Neither human nor intelligence nor any other intelligence. And I'm also with you with the idea that we can think of animals as being intelligent in certain ways. I wonder, though, why we need to extend the concept of thought so far to think of slime mold as being having intellectual thought. In other words, we're ascribing intelligence and want to expand our concept of intelligence beyond merely human beings. And why? Because lots of animals display complex behaviors that we can recognize as intelligent in certain ways. Decision making, empathy. A whole range of attributes of intelligence are manifest in the animal kingdom, but I don't see it. That doesn't mean to say that all forms of intelligence are equally manifest in the animal kingdom, or that all animals manifest thinking behavior. In other words, whether or not I think my mic might have gone. Whether or not the intelligence is manifest or particular kinds of intelligence, say thinking, sympathy, whatever it is going to depend upon the behaviors manifested by the individual animals, right? And so I think that one can't just sort of universalize the argument and say, well, there's this thing called non-human thinking, and it's a universal thing, and it's indiscriminately applicable to any kind of sentient or non-sentient animal life. One has to make the distinctions between the different kinds of behaviors that the animals exhibit, and ascribe predicates of intelligence or mentation or human or mental attributes on a case-by-case basis. It's not really a question; it's a statement. But there is a question there, which is about how do you think about if you're substituting, if you're getting rid of the brain as the basis for understanding intelligence, which I think I agree with, then what are your criteria of intelligence? And I think it has to do, from what you were saying, with behavior. And then if it's behavior, then I think you have to discriminate.
Yeah, I can begin addressing this comment. Just to say that I think that you're right, that it does seem more like a case-by-case basis. And at some point, I think it is a little bit speculative because obviously we don't have a firm definition of intelligence. But our point was that, the more we try to create some sort of hard line between, let's say, human and non-human intelligence, or even with Cohn, he wanted to kind of shift the line, I would say, to between, like, he would think a tree could think, but not a rock, or something like this. But it seems like the more we try to move this line, it doesn't seem like there really is a boundary. I personally think that it's more of an emergent phenomenon that is present in all things at different levels of complexity and also different forms. So yeah, it's not that we're saying that there's no distinction, but it's just that there should not be put in place an arbitrary hierarchy, and that also that could be more of a diversity, or like you said, a case-by-case basis. And that also we do have, a kind of obsessive focus on types of intelligence that are similar to us. And it's not to say the brain is not an interesting and good model of intelligence. It's just not nearly a complete picture.
Okay. All right.
Okay, can I add something really quickly?
Sure.
Yeah. So I think the emphasis on like a behavioral lens is interesting. Like being real specific about what you're seeing and like how this is the problem, right? What you're seeing and sort of how it relates. That feels like it's almost an inherently relational kind of thing. It's always going to be this is, you can only give a behavior a name if that behavior is somehow, probably somehow reflected in something we do, right? We don't really call the chemistry of bacteria a behavior, even though a lot of the fundamental biochemistry is quite similar. So to draw a kind of categorical distinction there is probably useful. I mean, I don't think we're claiming that like rocks and monkeys are identical. I don't think that doesn't make a huge amount of sense. But rather that deliberately sort of squinting, deliberately crossing your eyes, something like that, deliberately forcing yourself not to apply something like a behavioral lens can also be productive. Because it can force you to sort of, in some ways, where a lot of the work that we've looked at in this session has to do with using a machine learning technique as a tool for examining something else. And I think that can be just as interesting as a sort of cognitive trick as it is a sort of technological one as well. Maybe that's all we're saying. I think there's something deeper there, but it probably requires more work than we can get through in 20 minutes anyway.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say anything, but I do think that there's a categorical difference between rocks and animals. And I think the categorical difference resides in that rocks do not manifest behavior. So fine, if you want to say that there's a criteria for intelligence that is neither that of the brain nor that of behavior, then okay, I'll go with that, but you've got to tell me what it is. What is the criterion? What are the criterion that allow us to ascribe forms of intelligence to rocks? And you tell me that criterion, and then we can start a conversation. But right now, I haven't got one. To me, the boundaries of it, there are limits to intelligence, and they end with rocks. I'm happy with that. Rocks are not intelligent. That's what's wrong with that. Certain things are intelligent and certain things aren't, and we can draw these boundaries. They are the boundaries of our concepts. We have no other guides than the concepts that we have. I mean, you can say that rocks are intelligent, but then you've got to tell me what are the criteria on which you're basing that assertion. Otherwise, it's just a dream.
I'm no geologist, but I might argue that rocks could be intelligent. You can have rocks that are partially made of living things that have microbes in them that are carrying out, very interesting mineralogical processes. You can have electroactive bacteria in soil. So it's not to say that we're trying to define intelligence. We're just putting forth a provocation that we should rethink these things, and we should maybe look at what thinking could look like on that scale. And I personally don't know enough about rocks, but I'm sure there's some sort of behaviors that you could ascribe to rocks.
Okay. I think the question was asking for something like a criterion. Oh, the question was saying that if you want to ascribe intelligence to rocks, or if you want to expand the idea of a symbol or a sign or a language, just to give us some criteria, some rules, some characteristic marks whereby we can identify what is and what is not intelligent. I think that was, and it's kind of a challenge. If you want to challenge the boundaries of the concept, I think the challenge is going back to you. I think that's the question that was being raised.
Sure. I mean, I think the broadest version of this would be some almost thermodynamic thing, right? Okay. Self-organization, right? And I do think there's a good number of geological systems that do self-organize. Calling that thinking, I understand that there probably is some kind of qualitative difference there. Or at least that there's an experiential one. We don't experience rocks as thinking, certainly. But the biologist in me is going to insist that the physics that underlie what's going on with rocks are not really that dissimilar than the physics that underlie any other things. I mean, the provocation right back is, okay, define behavior. Right? If your wedge point is these things don't behave, what does behave mean? I think that's just as tricky a question as the original one in some cases. Does behavior require agency? Does behavior require individuality? Does behavior require a certain time scale? Does behavior require observation? I mean, this is almost as thorny a question as the original one, which makes it even more interesting, I suppose.
Okay, thank you. That was a really interesting conversation. Let's maybe move on to some of the other panels, and we can come back to this later if we have time. But just to give a chance to everybody to participate in the conversation. Maybe we can come back to the second speaker and see if there are any other questions for Daniel Shanken. I have a question. There's something that you said that I found really, really interesting, and I'd like for you to elaborate on it. You spoke about, I think this is almost an exact quote from your paper, technology as a mirror to its own evolution. Can you talk a bit more about what you meant by that?
Yes, thank you for the question. Well, I was actually thinking about it quite literally as GANs and artificial intelligence are kind of considered the kind of penultimate technology, the end game of technology, where technology becomes self-aware and self-conscious of itself, which hasn't happened yet. But this idea of, also going back to the quote by Delanda, is how would a robot historian or artificial intelligence historian see the evolution of their own technology, of their selves, outside of human-made tools and devices, and if they would see us as see the technology, or see us as kind of insects, kind of mindlessly building themselves. So I was interested in, at the moment, using technology such as GANs to to look at its own its kind of own technical evolution from hand tools, from rock implements, early stone tools, to smartphones and kind of newer technologies, and just pose that question to the GANs itself, and through its output, kind of see what it generates and comes up with. And it's more posing this question to the technology, and this is kind of what the basis of this project was about, is testing these algorithms and posing these questions. And even with the GPT-2, looking at different text about AI and technology, posing that to the GPT-2 and seeing its output. And as it's quite a new project, I can't kind of comment on my thoughts on what these things mean, but I feel that in posing these questions, you might find some interesting answers, and that was the point of the. Yeah.
Can I ask why you chose GANs in particular? There are so many kinds of deep neural networks. You mentioned VAEs at one point. You could have picked VQ VAEs, for example. And what was the purpose of picking the GANs?
Well, picking the GANs. Well, I guess you're correct that there are other technologies, and I guess myself not coming from a technical background, we chose GANs because it was easily available due to budget constraints and these kind of logistical kind of things. So so basically, it could get the job done. And as far as what VAE even means, you'd have to pose that to our kind of technical team, but I appreciate any comments or recommendations on other GANs would be interesting. Yeah.
Thanks. Any other questions? Okay.
I had one for Daniel, actually. If I can't see the room, so I don't know if there's somebody else here.
Go ahead, please.
I didn't get a good sense from the images you showed, but are there sort of identifiable features that fall out of these things? It looked to me like you kept picking. It was picking up on handles was the thing. It kind of looked like to me. I saw maybe a socket wrench or something like that in there. But are there distinct? Well, I don't know. What we would call features, as well as what I guess the model is calling features that it's pulling out.
Yeah, there are definitely qualities that kind of run through the generated objects. Yeah, definitely, and that probably has to do something with the data set itself. And I think picking out hand tools, there's a lot of implements with these kind of handles and that carry through. But we tried to tweak it so it would kind of produce more random results. So you do get these kind of handle shaped tool objects, or what could kind of maybe fit into a socket, but these are all kind of speculating onto putting my own interpretations onto the objects. So I think in looking at these objects, I can imagine uses for them, but there's quite a lot of variations, and actually there were objects that were just kind of blobs and of nothing, voxels and things like that. So there are elements that run through it, but there's also, there's some artifacts within the process that are shown through the generated objects as well.
Yeah, I just had a follow-up to that, because, it seemed that all the objects were very rectangular and sort of linear, and, not many curves and smooth, which you associate with tools. Sort of smooth edges, curved edges, and so on. It seemed to not be able to produce those very well, or was that just the ones that you picked out?
That was the limitations of our computing power, because we had to run on a kind of lower resolution. So some of the objects you get the kind of artifacts of the process. These, if we ran it at a higher resolution, which we're planning on doing, the thing about this project is it's still running right now. So we want to, or I want to outsource, to a cloud computing farm, and up the resolution maybe to like 500. Right now, I think it's like at 150 or 180. Yeah. So.
Thank you very much.
I have a question.
Sorry, is it for who are you asking the question?
Daniel.
So would you mind waiting until the end, please? I'd like to move on to the other speakers to give everybody a chance. So sorry for being so rude. Thank you, Daniel. Oh, sure. Okay.
I have another one. If that's acceptable.
I'm wondering where it's coming from.
No, sorry. I know it's me too. Could you speak a little bit more about the connection to or what you see as the connection to the sort of surrealist tradition? I was interested in maybe in the way you see those things as different. Automatic writing is a very autogenous thing. It's something you're doing with your subconscious, right? This is like, that type of collaborative writing is something like with the collective unconscious or something, right? It feels like it's engaging a slightly different engagement. I don't know what the word there is, but could you just say a little bit more about how you see that sort of historical relationship?
Yes, so thank you for your question. Well, I started to think about how the surrealists, especially using the example of automatic writing and exquisite corpse, how the surrealists almost a century ago were also experimenting with some of the concepts that are quite prevalent in engagements with ML writing tools.
I think you have frozen. You have frozen again.
I started to think about them because of. Hello. Sorry about my terrible computer. Anyway, so going back to what I've just mentioned, the surrealist interest in automatic writing. One of the reasons why I picked up on this reference is because of the quotation that I showed you by the author who co-wrote the first AI novel with GPT-3, who is Alonso McDowell. So in his reflections on his creative process with GPT-3, he uses a very curious term, but I think very revealing term as well, to describe his collaboration with the MI writing tool, and that is the word oracular. And in fact, he went on to elaborate on how he sees himself almost becoming like this medium where GPT-3 speaks through him, but also vice versa as well. And because of this description of this, oracular relationship with GPT-3, and I started to think about how the surrealists oftentimes use, the concept of, for instance, mythology to describe their automatism, and how it is important to so-called re-mythologize at the everyday reality by probing into the unconscious and letting whatever flow into you come out in the form of, let's say, automatic writing, or in the form of images, where you have to come sort of, for instance, going back to the example of exquisite corpse, the fun part of the game is that you don't know what the previous person has drawn, and then you have to peel, open the folded sheet of paper and then pick up from where the previous person has randomly jotted down on the paper. And I think this is quite similar to how writers like Alonso McDowell engages with GPT-3. So in their case, they simply pick up what the ML writing tool suggests or spewed out, and then carry on writing from there. So I hope this answers your question to some extent.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, please.
It's actually a question about thought, but everybody on the panel can answer it. If I throw a stick to a dog, the dog will sprint and get the stick. Currently, we do not understand what the dog would have actually thought. So, do you think if machines were actually thinking, would humans be able to understand those thoughts?
Would anybody like to take that question up? the question is, if machines were able to think, would we be able to understand them?
Yep.
I think so. I guess I can pick it up and say, if we're arguing that thought is something that is sort of universal and emergent in all systems, there must also be something that I don't know, that unites thought as a phenomenon. And so even though you can't, let's say, read a dog's mind, we can infer and communicate with the dog. So we can speculate that it's thinking and make observations that, yes, the dog probably made some sort of connection. And so it's to say that we can communicate with other things because we share this this way of self-organizing, this way of, yes, thinking. And I don't know, if we take this more loose definition, we could argue that machines are already thinking. So algorithms that are, algorithms that start to develop on their own and kind of evolve on their own and create their own systems, languages, things like that. I don't know if we could argue that that is a type of thinking. And we do recognize it because we're very interested in it. We're engaging with it and communicating with it.
I would like to say that when we look at algorithms, don't we look or say that or understand that how the algorithm produced an output, we try to infer that if the algorithm reached that output, it must have thought a particular way. But then again, we do not have any concrete way to understand how it would have thought, or to understand if it had thought at all. I mean, it's a way, if there's a kid and the kid has memorized an answer, you never really know if the kid thought about it or answered the question out of memory.
This is an enticingly difficult question. However, the building police is signaling to me that we have to vacate this room immediately. So actually, it's a pity that time is so short, because this discussion could have gone on, and there are many, I'm sure, many other questions. So I'd like to again say thank you to this excellent panel. It's really been very good. So thank you everybody, and please let's express our appreciation to the speakers.